Greetings. My name is Louise Dente, and I welcome you to yet another edition of Cultural Caravan. On this edition is a special, as we're joined by someone who's no stranger to our audience, the Vice Chancellor Emerita of the New York State Board of Regents, Dr. Adelaide Sanford. Welcome to Cultural Caravan.
Thank you. I'm glad to be with you. It's a pleasure.
Well, Dr. Sanford, we had the pleasure of having you with us before, and you talked about a lot about your history, the history, what drove you into education, and some of the challenges and some of the successes. And this time, we want to talk about a book, your first book, that really is like a memoir. It's a beautiful memoir entitled From Enslavement to Belovedness, for the Dignity of My People. Tell us what inspired you to write this book.
What inspired me, most of all, was a realization that as far as I knew, my sister and my first cousin and myself were the only people who knew their enslaved grandparents. Some people will say, oh yes, I knew my great-great-grandmother was enslaved, or I knew so forth and so, but I didn't know of anyone who could say, I knew her, I held her in my arms, I listened to her words. She talked to me about her life. And I felt that that was a void that if I could fill, not just for my own children and grandchildren, but for our children in general, to have someone tell the story from their point of view and not have always somebody else telling our story. So that was the inspiration. Also the fact that I felt other people, upon reading the book, would reflect on their own life and try to find as much about themselves as they could and as much as they can leave for their children and grandchildren, so that they are not the only ones without a language, that the only ones that can't identify a place that they can go and send some money to dig a well because they don't know where the place is. I was hoping that it would serve that role as well.
Now, why do you feel that this particular book, what message did you want to send? Because to families, to people, what was the message to the community?
I think the message was that we are family and that we are not individuals standing alone, but that we are a part of a very potent, powerful, important group called the family. And the fact that I had pictures of my ancestors who were enslaved, I feel is very important. Sometimes we take pictures and we don't think about what they're going to be in the future. But the fact that I had pictures of my grandmother and my grandfather after they were enslaved enabled me to create a continuity of understanding for my children and for my grandchildren, and hopefully for the people who read the book. If you have some pictures, value them. Put the dates on them so that you have some idea of who they are and where they were, because we are the only people who have been enslaved, but in the enslavement lost much of our history in losing the language, in losing the pictures, in losing the story. So I'm hoping that that will be a part of what will come out. But whatever comes out is all right as far as I'm concerned. It wasn't written for me personally. It was written for people in general, so that you look at it and you say, oh, gee, I wonder what my grandmother was like. I wonder what she thought about. I wonder what she hoped for. I wonder what kept her going. I used to ask my grandmother, why did you want to live? You had no family. You had no recollection of home. What kept you alive inside of your spirit? What enables you to feel that spiritual connection that kept you going? And I think that's an answer that we all have to see.
You mentioned that your grandmother traced her roots back to Igbo. Was she aware of this, or how did you find out that Igbo?
So my grandmother was enslaved with her mother, and it was her mother, whenever she could talk to her privately, because you see, you had to have a mask so that when old Miss was around, you had to act like you were happy, and you were busy, and you pushed the other children of African ancestry aside. Get around under my feet. You're in my way. Even though these African children did not speak the language, because they were always separated by language, she would say, remember that you are an Igbo, and someday you'll be an Igbo woman. And I didn't know what that meant. My mother didn't know, but she knew it was important because of the circumstances in which this information was given to her. I call those wisdom words. So she told her children. That was my mother's generation, that you were an Igbo. Your mother was an Igbo. But it was my generation that was able to discover that that meant that that was the name of a group of people in Nigeria.
You know, one of the things when you look at the picture, and they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, Dr. Sanford, when I look at these strong faces of your grandparents and you think about your grandmother and your grandfather who are pictured, their face says so much. Certainly within your grandmother's face, I see your face, but I see the challenge, the impact of enslavement, but I also see the promise. And you and your siblings were that promise, despite all of what they went through, because your grandmother's face just speaks volumes about what hardship, but she knew that you were coming. And, you know, that's the thing. And you talk about family and the strength. There's a picture of you, your grandmother, your mother, and your sister. And you're sitting there with your arm around your grandmother, and she is there. And, you know, one thing about enslavement, and she reminds me, you know, when people look at Harriet Tubman, they notice she never smiled. And talk about that, the strength, the resiliency in the faces of our ancestors, because I'm looking at your grandmother and you could tell that I just wanted to know, what do you feel accounted for their disposition?
She had a powerful ability to connect spiritually, even if it was just a touch. She put her hands on you. You felt it. You felt something transmitted to you. And I used to ask her, how did she do that? What kept her able to do that? And she said, to live, to put my hands on you in freedom. Put my hands on you in freedom. It's different from putting my hands on you as an enslaved person to a daughter that's enslaved. Put my hands on you as a free person. And she said that it was what she hoped would be transmitted by this closeness, by this touch, by this capacity to love in spite of being surrounded by love as an enslaved person. That was what she hoped I would do, what she longed to know that I would do, what I would be, where I would go, what I would say, what I would stand for, what I would touch. And I always keep that in my heart and in my spirit, the touch of a free person.
And there's a lot that we take for granted, you know, these days, particularly not realizing the impact of what our ancestors dealt with and what they endured to get us to where we're at. In your book, you also have pictures of your children and your husband, and you talk about them. How was it as you became, in this point, as a mother, a wife? How was it now rearing children with this knowledge, this history that you also carried on your shoulder?
I think one of the impacts of it was that I took my children to Africa. I took my daughter twice, I took my son twice, and I took my grandson. There was the year that Asa Hilliard died. We were in Egypt with my son and my grandson. And it's all right for people to go wherever they want to go for leisure, to Disney World and all that. But there's something about going where the richness of your heritage is. Now, this coming summer, my daughter is going to take my grandson to Ghana. I had hoped to have been able to take him to Egypt, but I can't travel anymore. But they're going to Ghana. And in Ghana, there are quite a few Nigerian people. And I have some land in Ghana that was given to me by the chief where I wanted to build a school. They wanted a technology. I wanted a library. But all of that is in answer to your question that take your children, surround images of their power. I can remember as a child how we looked forward to the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. It's still in existence. My mother took us there. Every year she saved to take us to that luncheon where we heard about the greatness of our people. When you read about Dr. Clark, John Henry Clark, and his life in search of Africa, he talks about a grandmother that told him about the greatness of his people. Who tells our children about the greatness of our people? Is it Tarzan? Where do they hear the stories of power? We see the violence. We see the self-destructive behavior that comes about when you don't know who you are and you don't know that you're killing a part of yourself when you kill your brother. You're killing a part of yourself. You're killing a part of your legacy. You're killing a part of your heritage. Who's telling them? So the impact of the importance is not just a story about Adelaide Sanford, but it's a story about our people.
And in alignment with that and the impact, as you said, when you talk not just your own children, but also your grandchildren now who are young men who are coming of age, you also talk about and you really share with us some of the people that you met of your lifetime, distinguished people like the late Desmond Tutu, Bishop Desmond Tutu. How was that meeting?
Wonderful. He was a small man, as Dr. John Henry Clark. They were both small men. They weren't big, powerful men, but they had powerful minds. And to understand that we were sold worthy depended upon the strengths. You looked for a big man who could breed children, big woman who could breed children. But these were small men, but so powerful. So the notion of a big black man is not necessarily right, nor is it valuable. But it was valuable to the slave owner. But sometimes we overlook the real impact of the largeness of the mind. And so meeting Bishop Tutu, who was a very powerful little man, as was John Henry Clark, very, very powerful, brilliant, but small in stature. So meeting him and meeting a person like Sidney Poitier and Rosa Parks, and you saw the pictures of Rosa Parks, and they are impactful in my life.
Yes, and definitely they are. Another very special meeting that you chronicle is the historic walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And that is a historic picture on the 50th anniversary of yourself, as along with former President Obama and his wife Michelle, and walking hand in hand, the late John Lewis. Tell us about that experience, you leading the line with the first African American president and wife with 1,000. Tell us about that experience there.
Well, I had been going to Selma for many years because of the power of that march from Selma to Montgomery and the brutality that our people endured, for whom no one was ever punished. These were law enforcement agents that beat them and turned the horses on them and let them fall into the river and not get them out. And so I was a visitor to Selma, and I even bought property in Selma in the name of Winnie Mandela when she was there. And so when President Obama, I met him the first time in Selma before he became president. I had met him because he was a speaker at the Unity Breakfast. So when the 50th came, someone submitted a list of names to President Obama that should be invited to walk across the bridge with him. I don't know why I was selected, but I was. Now, there was a problem because the walk for the bridge, across the bridge, was always on Bloody Sunday. But there was impossible for some technicality. And so President Obama did not want to interfere with the historical march across the bridge on Bloody Sunday. So we were walking across the bridge, not all the way, but halfway on that Saturday, singing, I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. And then after that, we had the private session when we took the additional pictures. But it was a feeling again, as we walked, singing, we became family. We relived the agony and the pain. We relived the brutality that took place, for whom no one was punished. We lived for the fact that this once enslaved group now has a president.
Now, in alignment with that history, which, as you said, and again, the picture we, sharing with the audience at this point is a very powerful one in terms of and the history, the pain, the suffering, and the redemption of now 50 years later being to walk across there with the first Black president and wife and John Lewis, who was brutally beaten on that day and so forth. So I think that picture was very, really touched me, and I'm sure will touch those who look at it. In your book, you also talk about nuggets from your own personal story. And some of them, and again, we want people to take advantage of the opportunity to get this wonderful book published by Third World Press and kind of titled From Enslavement to Belovedness for the Dignity of My People by the Dr. Adelaide Sanford is so important because, again, very important information. You talk about something that people don't really understand. Before there were systems and structures to support our people, we had to do a lot ourselves, and one of them including burial. There's a section here where you talk about how one of your family members was instrumental with helping people to save money for burial expenses, as well as in something that happened that impacted the lives of you and your sister. Tell us about that.
Well, of course, there was no life insurance at that time. So the undertaker would go door to door, house to house, and collect whatever nickel, dime, quarter from these people and keep a record of it so that when they died, they would be able to be buried, because that burial ritual was always very important in African culture. So sometimes that was the first time I saw a hanging, was when we were out for the ride, because that was no recreation. You couldn't go to the movies, or there was no TV. So the recreation when we went to visit my grandparents was we would ride with my uncle out into the rural areas where he would collect this money. And sometimes we'd see those bodies that had been in fact, you smelled it before you saw it. The gruesomeness of a hanging is not just the visualization, but it's the smell. It's the animals that have eaten at them. And he'd take that body down and try to find out who's missing someone.
Wow.
How long has it been since you've seen him? And it turned out that it would be that person.
So basically, again, the thing that you do bring light to, that not only is a situation where we had to provide for ourselves in terms of insurance policies or collecting, but also people who are victimed by lynching, which is the tragedy of lynching. There would, that your uncle took, had to take the body down, go around, find the person, the family, to claim the body, and that itself was just a heartbreaking, experience. And you think about, this is what was happening for decades, and this impact. So your story does go into that. In addition, you do talk about the late great Dr. John Henry Clark and your experience in Egypt with Dr. Clark. Anything particular that stuck out for you?
Well, I think I'd like to just add, in terms of the undertaker, the story "Don't Drop a Tear," because it tells how we took care of each other. He didn't know when he saw that lynched body that that was somebody that he had been collecting nickels or dimes from. Didn't matter. Here was a human being that had been tortured, mutilated, and he cared about him, his humanity. So the caring about each other and taking care of each other, we don't hear enough about that, because we have separated ourselves and we have become individuals rather than a community. And in the story, Don't Drop a Tear, how this minister took care of the family, took care of my mother and the three. He didn't know us, never saw us before, never will see us again, don't know their name, but they took care of us. Now, Dr. Clark was a person who was a caring human being. That's why the house is named the John Henry Clark House. And he, in his book, My Life in Search of Africa, he wasn't just looking for Africa for himself. He was looking for it for his people, for the connection that it would make with who we were and what we had done and what we would do. And so I think one of the essences in the book is the perpetuation of our caring about each other.
Dr. Sanford, this book is a testament to our story, a testament to your personal journey, and now over 97 years on this earth. And the fact that you decided to take a piece of your story and infuse it with some real essence of the humans, the story of our people, because everyone can relate to this story. What is it that you want to leave with to our people to reflect upon as it relates to your struggle and your journey, which is about telling our story, preserving our history? What is it that you want people to leave with this work? What do you want? What impact?
If you realize now that the governor in Florida, DeSantis, is saying that they cannot teach African American history in the advanced placement course, you'll know immediately why it's important. It's important because it enables you to have a sense of pride, a sense of direction, a sense of power that is frightening to some people. And that's the reason why it's so important. Why are people so upset about learning about African history? Why? Is it about reparations? Is it about you're thinking that if you become powerful, you're going to treat them the way they treated us? What is it? That tells you why it's so important. It's important because knowledge is power. And for the oppressor, the power of the voice of the oppressed is very terrifying. But you are not able to exert that influence if you are self-destructive, if you don't know who you are, if you don't know who your brother is, if you don't have a sense of responsibility for each other, for taking care of each other, then the oppressor can do whatever he wants to with you and your life and your children. And you see that today in political work. Why is it that there is such anxiety around history? African history and African American history is American history. And the truth about American history has not been told. And if you know that one of the reasons that they're saying they don't want the critical race theory, it said that critical race theory is that it will make the European child feel badly about what their ancestors did. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine what it makes the African American child feels about the void in his history? Mm-hmm. So that's why it's important to put things in perspective. Look at it with a deep thought, not superficial, not fanciful, not fictitious, not make-believe, not fantasy world, but reality. The reality of the greatness of who you are and who you will be and can be and must be. And must be. And so for the three of us, and we're the last that I know of, who knew, embraced, loved, cared for, learned from their enslaved ancestors, we had a Zoom call. My cousin is 105. My sister is 98. I will be 98 this year. My sister then will be 99. What do these three women know? What can they tell us? Why should we care? That's what I hope they'll take away.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed this broadcast, and we continue to encourage you to tune in, to write, or to tell a friend. But please visit our website at www.ccptv.org. But until next time, Louise Dente saying thank you. If you would like to support these broadcasts, we encourage you to send contributions to P.O. Box 300851, Jamaica, New York 11430. Thank you.